Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me once again. We're going to have an opportunity now to talk about open doors and closed doors, and that is going to be a conversation we have today with Dr. John Ortberg. He is the senior pastor of Menlo Park Presbyterian Church. His teaching is centered on the idea of faith in Christ and how it can impact your daily life. He has certainly been very prolific in a number of books that I think all of us have enjoyed over the years. You've got such books, for example, is If You Want to Walk on Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat, The Life You've Always Wanted, The Me I Want to Be, and many more. Was raised in Rockford, Illinois. We're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of some of the things that happened to his father, but also holds a Master's of Divinity degree as well as a doctorate degree from Fuller Seminary, also graduated from Wheaton College, has also served as the teaching pastor of Chicago's Willow Creek Community Church. And Dr. John Ortberg, just a great opportunity for us to be with you today. So thank you for joining us.
Holy smokes, what a gracious introduction. Thank you. I'm eager to hear what I have to say now.
I am too. Fascinating book, just fascinating book. People always hear about this idea of open doors and closed doors, and we're going to be talking about sometimes the fact that we are actually challenged to go through some doors that are really very scary for us, but as you point out, God rarely commands us to stay put. He always wants us on the move, and sometimes we have to walk through those doors, even if it's very scary.
Way back at the very beginning, the word missional, to be a missional Christian or a missional church has become a huge one, and it goes all the way back to Abraham and the beginning of God's people, and the first word is go. Like, I want you to leave everything that's familiar, and what's interesting in that story is he says, go to the land that I will show you. Well, that's a little vague. Like when Sarah asks, hey, where are we going? Every wife wants to know where her husband thinks he's going. Just to say, God will tell us when we get there. There's so much uncertainty and ambiguity in that story, and I think for characters in the Bible generally, and for us. And so often we romanticize those stories, or we think that they had a different kind of experience, but they, like us, just have to go one step at a time, and open door living always involves uncertainty.
I mentioned the fact that you grew up in Rockford, Illinois, and we've actually had radio stations up there that hear us, and it is, I think, interesting to talk about the contrast between Rockford, Illinois, and California. But your father, who was a CPA, had to make that decision. And early on in the book, you tell that story because I think it's an illustration of how many times God wants us completely out of our comfort zone. And that, as far as I can determine, was definitely out of the comfort zone of your father, but yet he was obedient to the Lord and walked through that open door.
Well, it's actually something I admire a ton. My folks still live now in Southern California. They moved out almost 30 years ago, but my dad was born in Rockford, Illinois, lived in the same home till he went off to college. He is a Swede. He was a CPA by kind of nurture and training. Drastic change is not something that was normally part of his life. But when he got to kind of a midlife point, he was getting close to 50. He and my mom both had this sense of, our life is fine, it's comfortable, it's good, but is this all there is? Is there no more kind of adventure to it? And with my dad, now it's very different than what my experience has often been, but part of the point of this book is that open doors may look real different from one time to another. My dad actually had a series of pretty dramatic kind of interventions, conversation with somebody, a sermon that he listened to, where even though initially he felt like, I don't want to leave home, I don't want to leave Rockford, this feels safe and comfortable, he ended up taking a very different job working with a church in California for less money, but with a real clear sense of God's calling me to an adventure, and I'm going to say yes. And for he and my mom, that both ended up becoming the great adventure of their life. And if there's anything that they would not want to have missed, that would be it.
What a great story, and I let people read the rest of it in the book, which is entitled, All the Places You'll Go Except Where You Don't. God has placed before you an open door. What will you do? And we have a link to John Ortberg's website, johnortberg.com, and that's a place where you can order the book and find out a little bit more. But let's, if we can, maybe set the table and talk about the difference between open door people and closed door people, because that's so key to the rest of what we're going to be talking about.
Well, this image of the open door as an opportunity from God to make your life count, to contribute to something bigger than just myself, yourself, is such a compelling one. And there's something inside every one of us that longs for that. And yet, so often we don't find ourselves living that way. And there is, I get into that in the book, kind of a open door mindset and a closed door mindset. There's been very interesting research around how people, even children, respond to failure, and how when little kids take tests that are really difficult, for many of them it's kind of a traumatic experience and they feel badly and they're depressed by it. But there'll be a certain number that even when they're taking the test and it's really hard, they smack their lips, they clap their hands together and say, man, I had really hoped to be challenged. And at the core is kind of this difference, that some people look at the events of life as testing their basic competence, and that means that they're always at risk, and that failure would demonstrate that they're not competent or they're not able or they're not smart enough, and so they go into avoidance mode, and they tend to be closed-door people. They don't want to have to face the anxiety of an open door.
Wow.
And then there'll be other people whose primary motivation is they want to grow. So their big question isn't, am I smart enough, or am I competent enough, or how will I look through this? Their motivation actually is, can I grow today? And therefore, problems become something that they actually welcome. Mm-hmm. And whether or not they get 100 or 90 or whatever it is, doesn't matter nearly as much as, did I grow today? And, of course, if I grow today, that means inevitably I'm going to fail. I'll be over-challenged. But those are the people that end up becoming open-door people who actually look for and long to go through open doors. So there really is a different mindset that will lead us to becoming open-door or closed-door kind of people.
Part of the book, All the Places You'll Go Except Where You Don't. And it is, again, a great opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about this idea of open doors and closed doors. And, of course, an open-door person is somebody who says, I'm ready. And yet, of course, as you talk about in the book, a long list of individuals that really said, I'm not so sure I'm ready, whether it's Moses or Gideon or Abraham or Jeremiah or Isaiah, the rich young ruler, Ruth, Saul. You go through a very long list. So we need to take a break. We come back, we're going to spend a little more time talking about this book. It is published by Tyndale, and you can look for it in your local bookstore. But we have a link to John Ortberg's website, which you will really enjoy, as well as information about the book itself. And it will, I think, challenge you. And, of course, if you're familiar with many of his other books, as I think all of us are, this is just one more to add to your bookshelf and to your reading stack, because it will certainly help change your life. God rarely commands us to stay put. He certainly may be calling many of us right now to begin to walk through a door that is open, or in some cases we're going to talk about closed doors as well. And this will be a great opportunity for you to grow in your faith and move out in places where God really does indeed intend for you to be. God opens doors. He invites people to walk through them, and that's why we're talking about this today. Hope it will challenge you, and we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation today with John Ortberg, and a little bit later talk about how you can apply some of these principles. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last month, there was a big media flap because Michael Cohen, the president's personal attorney, revealed that Sean Hannity was a client. All sorts of media commentators said that Hannity should have revealed that he had a relationship with Cohen when he was talking about the FBI raid on Cohen's office. That seemed like such a good idea that some have suggested this be called the Sean Hannity standard. Not only should the Fox News host reveal his connections to people he discusses, but everyone in the media should do so. I welcome that because in researching this, I found various articles talking about the connections many in the mainstream media have with people they interview. George Stephanopoulos has served as the press secretary for President Bill Clinton, but he also interviewed former FBI Director James Comey about his decision not to prosecute Bill Clinton's wife Hillary over her mishandling of emails. NBC's Chuck Todd regularly interviews various Democratic senators. His wife is a longtime Democratic consultant and has even served as communications director for a Democratic Senate campaign. According to this new standard, Chuck Todd should have disclosed his wife's relationship with these Democrats. CNN's Jake Tapper used to work for Handgun Control, Inc., but I don't remember him acknowledging that before he moderated a town hall on gun violence. He also has been a press secretary for a congressional campaign, and his wife has served as a regional field manager for Planned Parenthood. NBC's Andrea Mitchell is married to Alan Greenspan, former Fed chairman. ABC's Claire Shipman is married to Jay Carney, former Obama press secretary. The list goes on and on. Perhaps that's why the idea of implementing the Hannity standard faded so quickly. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're privileged to have with us again John Ortberg, and he is the senior pastor of Menlo Park Presbyterian Church, all the places you'll go. And we're talking about these open doors. And just before we went to the break, John, one of the things we did talk about is how very few people in the Bible, when indeed God calls them to do something, say, I'm ready. And I thought it was intriguing that you have a fairly long list of individuals who, even though there was an open door, had a little bit of hesitancy before they were willing to walk through it.
Yeah, I think readiness, feeling ready, is a highly overrated commodity. Because very rarely when somebody is facing a great challenge in life do they have this sense of, I feel ready. But often, we'll use language, especially in spiritual communities, especially in the church, when we're facing a difficult situation, decision, calling, challenge, and people will actually say, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't feel peace about it. And, if you've been around church much, you'll hear that a lot. I just don't feel a sense of peace around it.
Right.
Well, in the Bible, how often does God come to somebody like Moses and say, okay, I want you to go face Pharaoh, who's the most powerful man in the world, and tell him, let my people go? Moses' response is not, I feel peace about that. As a general rule, that sense of calling or challenge, an open door will actually create a little acceleration in the heart rate department and little, sweaty palm. And God's promise there isn't, this will be easy. When you think about it in the Bible, when does God ever come to somebody and say, now I have an easy task for you? And, of course, he never does. Generally, if he's going to interrupt somebody by giving a calling to them, it's going to be something that's going to stretch them beyond their own resources. And his promise isn't, this will be easy. His promise is, I will go with you. And so a sense of inadequacy, uncertainty, and fear almost inevitably is a part of that open door life. And what I'm actually called to do is to accept that and say, I will not make having comfortable feelings and a manageable lifestyle my ultimate goal for life.
Wow. You know, it seems to me that right now, as we're even talking about this, some people are saying, well, are there any benefits that come from having kind of an open door philosophy? And you talk about the fact that open door people are unhindered by uncertainty. Open door people are blessed to bless. Open door people resist and persist. Open door people have fewer regrets. Open door people learn about themselves. There are tremendous benefits to being willing to walk through the door that God has opened for you.
You know, there'll be so many folks who are listening to us, Kerby, right now, where they're at a crossroads of one sort or another. You're deciding what school to go to, or finishing school and deciding what occupation should I take, or should I go to a new place of work, or at a place where work is getting really painful and you're thinking about leaving that, or there's a relational decision to make, or you're facing retirement, or, you know, we have these crossroad moments in our lives all the time. And for people who become open-door people, where they're regularly looking for and seizing those kind of opportunities, there's a kind of before and after dynamic where beforehand what that means is a lot of times I'm going to experience, you know, that sensation of, it's like when you jump into a pool of cold water. It's just actually getting up the nerve to take the plunge. And then once I'm in the water, it's like, God, I'm so glad I didn't miss this. And there's a whole field of research around regrets that's very interesting. What the researchers find is that when we're younger, we tend to regret some of the foolish things that we have done. I wish I hadn't eaten that, wish I hadn't asked her out, wish I hadn't made that choice. But as people get older, the nature of their regrets shift, and we tend to regret the things that we did not do. The risk that I didn't take, the generosity that I didn't express, the road that I did not go down, the challenge that I did not embrace, the difficult words that I did not say. As people move on in life, the biggest regrets are not, you know, the things that we were afraid of when we were young. They were the things that we let fear keep us from doing. And so, in a way, part of what the book is about, part of an open door life, is really kind of regret prevention. I don't want to get to the end of my life and say, man, I missed the doors that God most would have wanted me to go through.
You know, when you think about it, as you point out, there's a whole psychology today of regret. People have done that study, but many people that are familiar with social media probably seen the word YOLO, which stands for you only live once. And I thought it was great that you brought that up. We're going to talk about another one in a minute, FOMO, but let's talk about YOLO for just a minute, because that can be misused. Certainly, you talk about that in the book, but it's also a reminder that you do only live once. And at the end of your life, if there's a series of regrets, you can't go back into a time machine and make the other choice that you needed to have made back then.
That's exactly right. And, you know, there is this eternal dimension to my being, and that always has to be before me. And so there's great peace and confidence in that, and that's a real important part of understanding my life and its time frame.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have this life on earth, and I have no idea how long it will run, and you see biblical writings about that all the time. You know, human beings are like the grass. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. Teach us to number our days so that we gain a heart of wisdom. And God gives me the opportunity this day. That's part of why there's just an urgency to that statement that God makes in Revelation. See, I set before you an open door that no one can shut. And if I don't go through that door that was made for me, nobody else will go through it. And if I miss that door, it does not come back around, and doesn't mean that I don't have a great eternity before me with God, but it brings an urgency to everybody listening to us right now that I think one of the ways that the evil one tempts us isn't just, you know, necessarily to do dramatically scandalous things. It's just to drift and to slide by and to settle for mediocre relationships and mediocre minds and mediocre thoughts. And when God is placing doors of opportunity all the time, what I could learn, how I could grow, what I could contribute, where I will go through them with him. And I don't want to miss that in my one and only life here on earth. And I think that's part of why that little YOLO expression, you only live once, is so powerful, because there's a deep truth that brings urgency to every day in it.
You know, one of the other ones you talk about, and that was new for me, FOMO, that is fear of missing out. Sherry Turkle, a professor at MIT, has talked about that. And that's another fear, this fear that I'm missing out. And really, you talk about the need to overcome the fear of missing out, don't we?
Well, there's, again, a bunch of research on that one that's very interesting. And people are finding that social media has intensified this fear enormously. Yes. And so several studies actually indicate that people actually kind of get depressed going on Facebook.
Yes, I've heard that.
Tons of folks go on Facebook, but what happens is when we go on Facebook, we all make our lives look a little bit more glamorous and exciting and successful than they actually were. People don't usually go on Facebook and say, I got really bad pimples today, and I'm feeling kind of depressed, and I couldn't sleep well last night, and my boss is mad at me. And, we don't do that stuff. It's just all went to this place. My kids all got into these great schools. And so we developed this enormous fear that somebody out there is living the life that I was supposed to live. And then it becomes difficult to actually make the commitments to sustain and nurture us, because we'll think, oh, no, there's a better restaurant out there. There's a better relationship out there. There's a better experience out there. And so to get liberated from how other people look, because I always tend to judge my insides compared to other people's outsides. And to be able to let go of that and say, the experience that anybody else is having, their accomplishments, their resume is irrelevant to me. And God, I don't want to miss out. Not in the sense that I'll torture myself by comparing myself to other people, but the reason that we are appropriately vulnerable to that fear is we were made to not miss out, but it's not about missing out on some other person or some achievement. I don't want to miss out on God. I don't want to miss out on the adventure of contributing to other people and to creation by partnering with courage and love together with the God who loves me. I don't want to miss out on my life. And so there's an element of validity to that fear of missing out that can actually help drive us back to God and back to the doors that he puts before us.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation today with John Ortberg. And again, you have links to his website. And again, this book, you can probably find in your local bookstore. If not, you can certainly find it on his website. All the places you'll go. It is published by Tyndale. We have lots of great information about it today on our website, pointofview.net. So go there to find out a little bit more about him, about his writings, about the various books that he has put together, his website, and much more. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after these important messages.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy. But by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
And we're back once again, and we are privileged to have with us today John Ortberg. The book is entitled All the Places You'll Go. It is published by Tyndale, and a little bit later we'll talk about some of the great resources you can find from him as well. But we were talking, John, about the difference between open-door people, closed-door people, some of the concerns, you only live once, and FOMO, the idea, the fear of missing out. But you also talk a little bit about some of the myths about doors. Of course, you also earlier on talked about how many people think that there are various verses in the Bible that aren't. But let's talk about some of those myths, because it does seem to me that if we're really going to be able to be courageous and to walk through doors that God has given us, at the same time, there are some very important mistakes that we make. God is not involved maybe in my insignificant life, or if I can't tell which door to choose, either God is doing something wrong or I am. What about some of those myths that I think we carry with us in terms of making important decisions?
Yeah, I remember my wife's aunt. We had a long argument one time because she insisted that the phrase "God helps those who help themselves" is her favorite Bible verse. And I said, not only is it not in the Bible, like the Bible's the other way around. God actually wants to help us. And so there's all kinds of myths. But one of them is there's a lot of people that actually think the Bible says, whenever God closes the door, he opens a window, and that was actually Julie Andrews or Mother Superior or something, but it wasn't
Sound
really
of
God.
Music. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But yes, when it comes to those open doors that God sets before us, I think that topic is one where there's a huge amount of confusion and misunderstanding that's super important, because it actually interferes with people's ability to live in experiential, interactive relationship with God. And I would say one of the huge myths is that if God has an open door for me, he will send super clear, unmistakable direction about it. And I know for myself, this was an area that took many, many years for me to come to understand. When I was finishing up with school, I was trying to make a decision about what occupation I should go into, what my calling should be. And I can remember, Kerby, just having hours where I would pray and was frustrated, literally in tears, because I wasn't getting any direction from heaven. And I felt like either God's not doing his part or I'm doing something wrong. And like, yes. God, I don't care. I'll do whatever it is. Just send me a postcard and let me know. And it took me many, many years to understand that God's primary will for my life isn't what task I do, it's what person I become, that I become the right kind of person. That's his main will. And it's very much like with my kids, if I were to always direct them, if I were always to say, wear these clothes, date this person, go to this school, take this job, buy this house, where they never had to make any decisions, they would never develop the kind of judgment or character that will make them really good people. So if I really love my kids and my main will for them is to grow into excellent persons, then often my will for them in any given situation is, I want you to choose, because you'll grow more if you have to choose than if you don't. And I think it's very much that way with God. And God knew, in my case, I was praying, God, what's your will? But the reality is, I didn't want God's will as much as I wanted to be spared the anxiety of having to make a difficult decision and carry the responsibility. And God knew that I would grow more if I had to struggle with learning about myself and learning about these different fields and making a difficult decision and taking responsibility. I would grow more if I had to do that than if he sent me a postcard saying, go to the school and take this job. But it took me a long time to learn that, and for a long time, and it's part of why I wrote the book. I think a lot of people get frustrated because we have these myths that people who get a calling will have some kind of mystic, powerful, supernatural, special effects experience in which they're told what to do. Now, God does do that. God's capable of doing that, but I believe we shouldn't presume on it. And often God doesn't do that for real good reasons. So I have to let go of the myth that If there's an open door before me, God is obligated to send me a postcard from heaven or some unmistakable direction to get there. And then I have to let go of the myth that if God doesn't do that, I must be outside his will for my life, or I must not be praying rightly, or somehow I'm having a less spiritual experience than another person who is getting that kind of supernatural direction.
One of the things you point out, John, is that there is really a theological error with that as well, because you say, when I try to use God the way someone uses a Ouija board or a magic 8-ball or a horoscope, I violate the nature of the divine-human relationship. I make me the master and God my genie in a bottle. It does seem to me that there's a theological error, and I think just like you, I've found that most of the really significant decisions in my life did not have this clear direction. I remember giving a sermon years ago that God's door swings on small hinges. You think about somebody making some comment, I think you'd be good in radio. Have you ever thought about teaching at Dallas Seminary? Have you ever, those kinds of things that, never really crossed my mind, but somebody said it, but it wasn't this big, bold, this is what you need to do. It was beginning to develop another skill, another ability, go walking through a door that you felt really nervous about that begin to be an answer. But if we treat this as something where God has to give an answer, and if he doesn't give an answer, then I must be out of his will, I think we're missing, as you said, the importance of using godly wisdom, what we have in God's Word and the Proverbs and other things, to make wise decisions about what God is going to do with our gifts and callings in life.
The reason in the Old Testament that you see these teachings against the use of superstitious means, trying to read the stars or omens or so on, is that God is not to be used in that way, that spiritual faith in a living God is very different than those kinds of superstitions or magic, because God himself is concerned for love and justice, and that means I can't use him for selfish gain in the way that folks will try to use, tea leaves or superstitions. With God, I have to place my life under submission to his will, and that primarily involves love and justice and the kind of person that I'm becoming. And that's where it can be so tempting to make even Christian faith or prayer just into superstition. I remember a guy that I knew, really, really bright guy, well-educated, knew the Bible well, but he was just obsessively interested in this girl, and he would say prayers like, all right, God, when I turn on this radio station, if our song comes on, I'll know she's the one for me. And it's like, that's not the way to discern God's will for my life.
Well, and you also think about all the decisions we make. You talk about this in the book, and you've done the math, so I'll trust it. In a lifetime, we'll make 1,788,000 different decisions, and because we're making different decisions every single day. And if you're waiting for God to give direction on all those decisions, you will be sorely disappointed, won't you?
When you think about why did God create the world, one of the things that we love and delight in little children is that they have a will, and that means that they're able to embrace freely, to love stuff, to think up ideas, and in the smallest ways. They'll just attach themselves to this blanket or this, ragged animal or doll, and they just love it. And we treasure that about them. And they will say things, or they'll have ideas or perceptions, and just the uniqueness is what we treasure. So it's a wonderful thing for me to step back and think of God's will for all of his creation, not as this static blueprint that I have to try to guess at, but as the creation of, countless beings who are redeemed, who come to love him, and therefore out of their God-given wills and little power are able to create and bring good in ways that nobody else could have predicted or foreseen, that bring delight to all of us and to God. that is such a beautiful and deeper way of understanding what God is up to, what His will for His creation is.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll finish off our conversation today with John Ortberg, and again, only covering part of the book because there's so many great insights in here, 260-plus pages, great material. I do commend the book to you, and for those of you that would want to understand a little bit more about how God is directing you in terms of your life and your Christian life, this would be very helpful. I might alert those of you that are pastors or Bible study teachers. This would be something that would be great to teach through or preach through or have as a small group. We'll talk about some of those resources in just a minute. But you can find out a lot more about John Ortberg, about this book, All the Places You'll Go, and it is published by Tyndale. Look for it in your local bookstore, but we have a way for you to connect up with him and get the book there as well. All available on our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, you'll also, of course, find some of my commentaries as well as our Take Action section, as well as videos that you can watch. And we would encourage you to take some of the material that we're talking about today, maybe put it on your Facebook page, or if you have a blog, or send it by email to someone else so that you can increase the impact of this. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. According to the Fresno Bee, the Fresno City Council is considering adding the national motto, "In God We Trust," to the wall of the council chambers. But at least one local resident opposes the proposal. In the mind of one atheist protester, the delicate balance between church and state is upset entirely by the public display of these four words. And despite the fact that the atheist writes, quote, "Atheists like me feel the idea of God has little meaning," unquote, he encourages the local community to oppose a word which he believes has little meaning. One wonders how a word with such little meaning can violate the so-called separation of church and state, but that's another issue. Of course, if folks wanted to purchase the article in the Fresno Bee, they would do so with coins bearing the national motto since 1864. The City Council would be in good company with the United States House of Representatives, which has the motto emblazoned behind the Speaker's dais. And on the way to City Hall, residents may have to drive by police or sheriff's cruisers sporting the national motto. Throughout America's history, the national motto has been honored and celebrated as an expression of what it means to be an American. Any effort to prevent its display should be rejected as bald efforts to rewrite our history and destroy our heritage. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back. Dr. John Ortberg with us for just a few more minutes. And, John, just before we continue on in the book, I thought I'd mention a few things. First of all, I know that you've been on the board of the Dallas Willard Center for Spiritual Formation. You even talk about your interaction with him and what a great man he was. But this would be a great book and some of the other resources you have to help individuals in a church, maybe even in a Christian college or school and other places, develop spiritual formation. So for just a minute, let's talk about what people will find on your website, johnortberg.com, because there are some great resources that I hope people will take advantage of.
Well, thank you very much for asking. Yeah, Dallas Willard is a remarkable thinker, teacher, writer about God and faith and the nature of life and how it is that human beings are changed and where God fits into that. And those are the questions that to me have always seemed so important and have always been kind of at the center of what I'm trying to write about and think about and help people with. So, yeah, as folks go there, those kind of resources to help people think through, how do I change? Why is change often so hard? How is God a part of that? What are ways that I can pursue that? How do I pursue spiritual life so that it's not this list of obligations, not a to-do list, not legalistically pursued, but flows out of a vision for life with God in his kingdom? And then I actually discover practices and experiences and relationships that become means of grace, that become like little conduits that can help me plug into that power, into that kingdom. That's what I really try to write about and make available to folks.
Well, again, you've got resources, a blog, a media, much other resources that are available. So certainly do commend that to everyone, and we have that link on our website. Before we run out of time, I thought we might talk a little bit about what Open Doors can teach you about you, because as we've talked about, there's some tremendous benefits that come from being an open door kind of person, but also it helps us understand who we are a lot better, does it not?
Yeah, self-awareness is so critical, and you see this, way back in the Old Testament, search me, O God, and know my heart, and when Paul says to the Church of Rome, have a sober estimate of yourself. And what I love about this topic, and part of why I wanted to write the book, is it's just so applicable at key moments in our lives. And a lot of folks that are listening, if you're finishing school and trying to figure out what's next for you, or you're at a relational crossroads, or you feel kind of stuck and stagnant, you're wondering what to do next with your life, or, at all of those primary choice points in our lives, instead of having my primary focus on externally trying to, get some kind of tea leaf reading, very often what God wants for us is what James says, that if you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to everybody generously. So the place to start is just with wisdom. And that means looking at, how did God make me? And what strengths did God give me? What passions resonate deep within me? What weaknesses and limitations do I have? What kind of feedback do I get from other people about, nope, you don't do this well, John, so I wouldn't waste a lot of time here, or, yep, you're effective when you do this. And, my hope is that through this book, which often folks can do individually, but especially doing together in groups where we can help each other get clarity around this. And then for whole churches, if anybody's pastor of a church listening, to think about, initially that passage in Revelation I've set before you, an open door, that's not addressed to an individual. That's addressed to churches. So churches need open doors. Churches need to pursue what's the open door that God has given us to our community and to our world, and to go on that adventure together as a whole group, or even better yet, together as a whole church, I think is fabulous.
And I might just mention that you do have a chapter here, Thank God for Closed Doors. Some of us love baseball, and you talk about the fact that baseball executives say that some of the greatest trades are the ones never made. And so sometimes those closed doors are important, and sometimes God does keep us from going one place or another. And, of course, even the Apostle Paul dealt with closed doors, did he not?
It's quite amazing, actually, Paul's ability to accept closed doors. And even, like, there's a time when he's in jail in Philippi and there's this earthquake, and so it seems like the door opens for him to be able to go, but he recognizes he can do more good if he doesn't go through that door, which, personally would have to be so tempting. He can do more good for God if he doesn't go through it than he does.
Yes.
And, I think that closed doors, this relationship didn't work out. I did not get this job. This opportunity did not go forward. God is every bit as involved in those as he is in open doors. And what I can learn as I come to grips with that, as I discovered why did that door stay closed, as I learn how do I accept that without becoming a martyr or think now I'm on God's plan B, closed doors are a huge part of our lives and our spiritual lives and our learning.
You know, and we learn quite a bit from just the accountability that God gives to us through other individuals. Late in the book, I remember you said, what would I do right now if my friend Dallas Willard were standing in line with me? Great question, you know, because of the profound influence he had on you, and of course on all of us that have had a chance to read some of his books. But there is a sense in which we go through the Christian life together, and sometimes this North American Lone Ranger kind of philosophy is something that we need to reject.
Well, and, you know, we live in a time that just increasingly places so much weight on the self and just on me as an individual, and commitment is very hard for us because we just want to maximize freedom and independence. And I do think it's very significant that that offer of God's open door initially is placed before a group of people who are all committed to each other.
Yes.
And a lot of the open doors in our lives are relational open doors. As I'm talking with you, as we become friends, how do I go through that door to a deeper level of friendship and doors of vulnerability, doors of self-disclosure, doors of openness and honesty will lead to a deeper level of relational intimacy and then much deeper growth. So doors are about a whole lot more than how do I have a fulfilling job and make lots of money or stuff like that.
Dr. John Ortberg, first of all, thank you for your other books, but thank you for this book, and thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View. It has been wonderful, and I certainly do commend the book to our listeners who are always trying to figure out what God might do in their lives. I think this will help you understand what it is to be an open-door person, and I thank you for writing about it, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, that's super kind and gracious. Thank you very much.
Well, hope you enjoy that interview. Let's take a break. But just before we do so, let me mention some of the resources we always make available here at Point of View. If you'd like to listen to this broadcast again, of course, you can download that. We have a podcast. Just click on the button at pointofview.net that says listen. Or perhaps you'd like to watch it. Of course, we also make that available as well. And so there's some great resources so that you can find out more about John Ortberg and some of the work that he is doing. And, of course, we have lots of information that we are making available on our website. Let me just mention, for example, that my Viewpoints commentary is up today. And if you have not taken the time to sign up for that, we certainly encourage you to do so. You receive my commentary in your inbox Monday through Friday, and Penna Dexter's, which comes out once a week on Saturday. So if you haven't taken the time to sign up for that, please do so. It is very simple to do, and that's one of the resources we want to make available to you, because lots of times I put some of the facts and figures of things we've discussed here on Point of View, or sometimes focus on some other issues that we have not discussed on the program. So it is available to you at the website pointofview.net. Let me also mention, as we're coming to a break here, that we are listener-supported. We don't talk about that too often, but if you can help us out financially, we would greatly appreciate that. We have a Donate Now button, but we also have an opportunity for you to join the Truth Team, and for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, you can support this ministry as well. Do you need to take a break? And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. But again, take the time as we're going to a break to visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We have an opportunity to talk about a new book, but we have in studio with us today Mary DeMuth. She has been on the program with us many times before. Matter of fact, I think this is the third different studio we've been in, so you've been around for a while.
I have been around.
Yeah, and it is really a delight to have her here. You have heard her many times before telling her own story, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit today. Also a former church planter, but also an individual who's been a real mentor over the years to various people writing, and actually is a blogger and has spoken at many Christian writer conferences. So it's just a great opportunity to have you once again in studio. So what do you think of this new studio? Pretty
I
fun.
like it. It's cool. Good job.
You remember the old one, so you know,
I do. This is great.
This is called an upgrade.
Yeah,
so we'll leave
nice.
it at that. The book is entitled "The Day I Met Jesus: The Revealing Diaries of 5 Women from the Gospels," and it is written by Frank Viola as well as Mary DeMuth. And I love what he said at the opening of the book, and that is, when I released my first work of biblical narrative, and many of you are perhaps familiar with that book, God's Favorite Place on Earth, which told the story of Jesus and his frequent visits to the little village of Bethany as told through the eyes of Lazarus. Then, as he wrote it, he really had a plan to have another one talking about the story of 5 specific women. He said, "I didn't feel comfortable writing from the viewpoint of a woman, so I asked the most gifted Christian fiction writer of our time, Mary DeMuth, to co-author the book." You can't do much better than that when Frank tells you that you are the most gifted fiction writer of our time, and I would second that, by the way.
Well, thank you. That's humbling and exciting, so it's good.
16 books, I think, the last time I counted.
30.
Yeah, see, it says 16
I know.
here. So,
my press release is wrong. I need to fix that. I'm up to, this is number 30. Is that not the craziest thing?
I do 16. I can count 16 just that I own, you know, and I know there are a lot of books that you've written that I don't own. So 30 books. So you certainly bring a lot to the table. But let's talk about this for a minute, because in some respects, what he does is give commentary after you write very eloquently about these women. And we're going to talk about the women that you might imagine that were actually involved in Jesus in one way or another. This is the woman caught in adultery we see in the Gospel of John, the prostitute who loved him, of course, the Samaritan woman, which we see in the early part of the Gospel of John, the woman with the flow of blood, and of course, Mary and Martha, I should say. So, but first of all, you had to really get into their experience. And in one sense, you've had experiences that have made you maybe downtrodden or feeling broken. But in the other sense, you had to put this in the first century. And I was very impressed with the research that must have gone in. Can you share that with us for a few minutes?
Yeah, definitely. I had to do a lot of research on the first century and what's surrounding that. And I did a lot of even research just on women and the role of women just in society, not necessarily in the church, because the church hadn't happened yet when these women encountered Jesus. And then there was just a lot of gratefulness that came of knowing that my own story helped me to stick my feet into the sandals of these women. So a lot of the research was my own just imagining of what life must have been like, or what it must have been like to put myself in their situation and to taste. And you know, as a fiction author, to taste and to see and to smell all of the things that they would have seen. And then the joy of thinking, okay, what could their backstory be? And I obviously, since I am totally in love with the Bible, I am not saying that these are 100% accurate, because they cannot be. These are an imagining of what these women went through. So you're meeting Jesus through their eyes. And when we get to the biblical narrative of it, it is completely ripped from the headlines of Scripture. But
Yes.
Before that, it's an imagination exercise.
Well, and to use two of the women that you talk about out of the Gospel of John, you have the woman caught in adultery, and everybody thinks she was floozy and all that kind of thing, and there are other words we can use, but I can't use those on national radio. But you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And you gave us another perspective on that. The woman and the Samaritan woman with 5 husbands never even thought about, maybe it was barrenness or something that caused her to go through serial husbands. So fascinating backstory. Again, we'll be the first to admit you're speculating. We're all speculating, but at the same time, it gives you a little more compassion for each one of the women because John is just telling you the story. Here's what she said. Here's what she did. Here's what Jesus said. Here's what Jesus did. That was it. And the backstory is sometimes very fascinating for fiction writers, and you've done, I think, a very good job of helping us think that through. Let's, if we get into that one, woman caught in adultery. Your story's good on that because I never really wondered what happened before. Were they caught in the midst of the act? Where was the man? All those kinds of things. So without giving away everything in the book, let's, if we can, just talk about that backstory that you have for her.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, we never see the man caught in adultery. And wouldn't that have been an interesting story if the two of them were standing there?
Yes.
So you have this woman, and the implication, and scholars believe that there's some sort of setup, that they were using this woman that they caught to test Jesus in something. And so I imagined it as a woman who actually did want to do the right thing, but was in a difficult marriage and enticed away. And when the one time she finally decides, okay, I'm just going to let go and I'm going to follow this man who seems to love me, that is the one time she gets caught. And then she is, surrounded by stone throwers and thankfully also Jesus. But yeah, I think it was a setup of some sort. It just doesn't make sense that in the biblical law, the man should have been stoned as well. It wasn't just her that was supposed to be there. So here she is standing alone, totally, probably partially naked and completely ashamed. And it most likely was not something that she was in a repetitive, that's my thought, but just the demeanor of her in the middle of the conversation with Jesus is what I imagined.
When I teach Sunday school, oftentimes I'll show a video, and so I've looked through some of the videos on these various women over the years, and this one, without exception, I don't care if you look at Jesus of Nazareth or the Jesus film or whatever it might be, if they have it in there. Of course, this is not in the original text of the book of John, but if they have it in there, you always have her huddling down, almost never making eye contact with anybody, as you said, partially disrobed. And so you are talking about a woman who is totally humiliated, totally broken. You add something I'd never thought about before, slapped across the face, and perhaps gone through a lot more before she shows up before Jesus. And this is a great story, if nothing else, to speak to the women out here right now that find themselves in difficult marriages, trying to make the best of it, maybe have made some mistakes, know that they're sinners, but in the process, hear the words from Jesus. Neither do I actually condemn you. Incredible story. What would you want to say to some of the women just listening to this?
Well, I actually wrote a blog post about this story today on my blog. We had this conversation in our life group, and one of the things that they said in the life group was this man said, well, I became divorced and I went to a singles ministry and I kept getting propositioned for sex. And we were all like, what? And so there's that dual part of this interaction with Jesus. Yes, all the grace and the beauty and the mercy. I do not condemn you. Everyone's walking away. He's the only one that could throw the stone. And then he says, go and sin no more. And so it's a duality there. It's not just all the grace. It's also the responsibility of once you've received that beautiful grace, then you don't go hooking up anymore. You love Jesus so much that you can't even think about that.
That's really well said. Again, this is part of the book that we're talking about today, The Day I Met Jesus. We also have a link to MaryDeMuth.com, so you can read the blog there. I would encourage you to sign up for that, and you can follow her on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that. We have those links all available. But we need to take a break. We're going to talk about a few more of the women from the Gospels right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last month, there was a big media flap because Michael Cohen, the president's personal attorney, revealed that Sean Hannity was a client. All sorts of media commentators said that Hannity should have revealed that he had a relationship with Cohen when he was talking about the FBI raid on Cohen's office. That seemed like such a good idea that some have suggested this be called the Sean Hannity standard. Not only should the Fox News host reveal his connections to people he discusses, but everyone in the media should do so. I welcome that because in researching this, I found various articles talking about the connections many in the mainstream media have with people they interview. George Stephanopoulos has served as the press secretary for President Bill Clinton, but he also interviewed former FBI Director James Comey about his decision not to prosecute Bill Clinton's wife Hillary over her mishandling of emails. NBC's Chuck Todd regularly interviews various Democratic senators. His wife is a longtime Democratic consultant and has even served as communications director for a Democratic Senate campaign. According to this new standard, Chuck Todd should have disclosed his wife's relationship with these Democrats. CNN's Jake Tapper used to work for Handgun Control, Inc., but I don't remember him acknowledging that before he moderated a town hall on gun violence. He also has been a press secretary for a congressional campaign, and his wife has served as a regional field manager for Planned Parenthood. NBC's Andrea Mitchell is married to Alan Greenspan, former Fed chairman. ABC's Claire Shipman is married to Jay Carney, former Obama press secretary. The list goes on and on. Perhaps that's why the idea of implementing the Hannity standard faded so quickly. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking today about the book, The Day I Met Jesus, The Revealing Diaries of 5 Women from the Gospels. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore. It's published by Baker, but if you have any difficulty at all, I know some of you live in places where you don't have a nearby bookstore, we have a way to link to it on the website. Frank Viola as well as Mary DeMuth have written it. And Mary, while we finished maybe talking a little bit about the woman caught in adultery, what you do is provide an outstanding narrative, gripping. I mean, it really is a page turner. But then we go to the actual text, and then Frank does a very good job of walking it out, and he talks about what that means and how that can really begin to influence us. So it's a great way to not only have a little bit of a narrative, the fictional part, but then some commentary as well as the biblical part. And I think this would just be a great sort of Bible study for people to engage in. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I've had people reading it prior to Easter as their Lent activity. And oddly, people are just binge reading through the whole thing. So it's some people are going back and reading again. But yeah, because it's just 5 stories. So,
it's an easy read, but it also could be 6 weeks because you do the introduction, and then you've got questions at the back, which would be very helpful. So let me real quickly alert our listeners that this would be just a great opportunity for you if you're looking for something that maybe doesn't last 13 weeks, but is something you could do for 5 or 6 weeks, would be just something to be good for a small group. Pastors, I would recommend if you're going to preach on any of these topics, you would really benefit from this. So again, it is published by Baker, and you look for it in your local bookstore. If not, we have a link there. And of course, we also have a link to marydemuth.com. How about getting to the diary of a prostitute who loved much? There is, again, a story that I hadn't really thought about. What is her backstory? And you put some flesh to that and help us think about the fact that no girl, one day says, I think I'm going to be a pole dancer. I think I'm going to be abused. I think I'm going to be a prostitute. I think I'm going to go into sexual trafficking. And you give us a backstory for her, which I think is, again, very helpful.
It feels very modern in a way, her story, because it's the story of so many that are sex trafficked today, and the story of many women who are on the streets. She had an encounter as I said, I imagined that she had an encounter with a man who raped her. And at that point, she's damaged goods in that society. And a woman really couldn't make a living aside from being married. And so she found another way to make a living. And I think that's important to think about and to realize this is not, I think we can demonize prostitutes or demonize sex workers and whatnot, but we forget that there is a very long backstory attached to that of worthlessness and being used and being taken from. And so that's kind of the preamble to that story and why I kind of took it that way, because it made sense to me.
It was a good setup for something we did earlier in the week, because we interviewed an individual that had been raped as a child, then began to think maybe there's a better way to put myself through college, because my friend is a pole dancer and just undressing herself in front of others and making thousands of dollars that would take me months to make, and she's making that every night. And then gets involved with a boyfriend that she thinks loves him, but turns out to be a pimp, takes her to Las Vegas, and the whole story, on and on and on. And, of course, her story's today, and I am second. But it was so fun to read your story just after hearing her story here on Point of View just a day or two ago, and realizing that's how women oftentimes end up in that situation. Talk about that, too, because anybody that has read anything by Mary DeMuth, especially some of your fiction novels as well as your nonfiction story, recognizes that you struggled with that, and you really have a heart for, and I think a tremendous ministry to women listening right now that might say, I've been there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's rampant. It's getting worse, and with the proliferation of pornography on the internet, and with people just seeming to get away with things, with the church not reacting well and not being a safe place, it's a difficult issue. And yes, that's my story as well. And I'm just grateful that I met Jesus at 15, because I'm sure I absolutely could have gone down some very destructive paths, and the temptation would have been great to do that. But I guess what I want to say is there is hope, because this woman is praised by Jesus. And what I've been coming back to lately in interviews has been this idea of what she pours upon him is her wages for prostitution.
Yes.
And here she's in this kind of uninvited space, and here are these upright folks who supposedly, are making money the right way and are having the nice house and the nice banquet. And Jesus accepts her, and he disses the others.
Yes.
And so really there's hope. And I think that's the cool thing, is that when we are desperate, I think that's what God really wants from us. He says he chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. He chose her. And she was the approved one versus the ones that looked approved.
Yeah, and Frank talks about it being a collision of two classes, because think about this, the high and mighty, upright Pharisees, and yet here she comes and breaks that alabaster jar of perfume, which is, again, the wages. Where did that money come from?
Right.
From the sex trafficking or prostitution, whatever phrase you want to use. She's weeping. I mean, talk about a broken woman. She's weeping enough that her tears, as they're dripping on his feet, are enough for her to wipe them. And so you begin to see that. And then, of course, he tells the story, and people can go to Luke chapter 7, in which then he begins to explain, well, who had the debt? Two people owed money. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. Neither of them had money to pay back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Well, Simon at least gets that one right. I suppose the one who had the bigger debt is forgiven. And, of course, she's obviously the illustration there. So it's just a powerful story. But again, it reminds us of the need to make sure we're not Pharisees, or that we are not shocked by this collision of two classes. So for just a minute, if you might speak to pastors, because I've heard this many times from women I've talked to, that when they, for the first time, revealed to their parent, or in some cases the pastor, about what happened to them, the reaction is, oh, that couldn't have happened, or that didn't happen. And that's, I think, something we've got to change real quickly in the pastoral community, right?
Yes, I think we always need to err on the side of belief when a victim dares to share something. And sure, there's some out there that would make up stories, but the vast majority, it is excruciating to tell. And so simply asking questions and listening is the best thing that you can do, and having empathy and saying, gosh, I'm really sorry that happened to you. That is just not good. But yeah, I think we need to develop empathy. I also kind of wonder maybe if Jesus was playing a little bit with this 500 and this 50, maybe he was really referring to Simon as the 500 and she with the 50, because she already knew her need. And the text suggests that she met Jesus prior to this, because this was an act of devotion. After something had happened. And so she was this was her response to Jesus. His response was to throw a banquet with important people. Her response is just to lay herself out and unbind her hair, which was like going topless. I mean, it was a very out there thing that people would be like, oh my gosh, not cool. But she didn't care. She didn't care about what was cool. She just cared about adoring Jesus. And that's what I love about the story.
Like you said, there is some evidence, obviously, that they had met before. There was a mistake that was made during the Middle Ages where they thought, because you read one passage about Mary Magdalene, you read about that, they thought those were the same women. They are not. I think there's good reason to argue against that. But nevertheless, they had some kind of communication, and she already was convicted of her own sin and already devoted to Jesus. And here Simon is kind of watching this. And of course, the Pharisees have their stiff necks, and it's kind of an interesting story, which again is extremely well written by Mary DeMuth. So let me encourage you to find out a little bit more. The book is entitled The Day I Met Jesus, The Revealing Diaries of 5 Women from the Gospels. Frank Viola as well as Mary DeMuth are the authors of that book. And if you click on the See More section here, you'll see a couple of things. First of all, we have the link to marydemuth.com. And you have the blog there in case you want to follow her, speaking engagements, the store, because as we mentioned, this is one of 30 books that she has written. So if you are looking for many of her other books, I would really recommend that you do so. And as you do that, you will also find that we have the book itself, and then just a short little review that was actually on the Baker Publishing Group, so that you know a little bit more about it. Sometimes you like to read about a book before you buy it. So it's all right there. And one more thing, which I did not know till you came in, so I'll hold this up for the screen here. It's also an audio. So for people that would like to get Christian audio, you can listen to it, you can read it, and I think it's going to be a great way for you maybe to read through it on your own, or to make it part of your small group or something of that nature. So visit our website, pointofview.net. Got lots of articles there, which I really would encourage you to get, because these are resources that will be helpful to you in your own ministry. And certainly as we come back, we'll continue our conversation talking with Mary DeMuth. But let me mention that as you go to that website, pointofview.net, you can find out more about her book. You can find my Viewpoints commentary today. We have some videos and some other resources. And if you'd like to listen to this again, or maybe use this in your own teaching, certainly those resources are available at our website, pointofview.net. Need to take a break. We'll come back with more right after these important messages.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Mary DeMuth in studio with us today, and the co-author of the book, The Day I Met Jesus, The Revealing Diaries of 5 Women from the Gospels. And perhaps you have dealt with some of these discouragements and brokenness and all the things that we're talking about today. Love to hear your story as well. And Mary DeMuth has certainly written on those subjects. And before we're finished, I'll talk about some of those books because I think it would be helpful. But let's keep the train moving down the road here. And we have the Samaritan woman, and that's where you change my mind completely, because when you hear of Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman about 5 Samaritan husbands, you think, well, she was just, going through serial marriage, divorce. But you added an element that just made me have even more sympathy for her, and that is perhaps it was barrenness that caused the first 2 husbands to throw her out. Then you had kind of some serial marriages, and then you have one that maybe loved her and died. And I hope I'm not giving away story, but I just thought it was so powerful because you have an incredible more amount of empathy for her situation. And you can see the brokenness in her life, even as she's interacting with Jesus on that.
Yes, and I had a really great conversation with Dr. Sandra Glahn. She's a professor at DTS, and she kind of put that little idea in my head, and I thought, it really does make sense, because barrenness was a reason to divorce back then. If you couldn't produce an heir, it was a big problem. And so you have this idea of maybe that she struggled with infertility, which so many people today even struggle with. So I loved that idea. Plus, when you see her interact with Jesus, there's never any mention of children. He doesn't mention that she has children, and she doesn't, when she goes back to her village, there's no mention. And so I'm pretty sure that that's what went on back then.
Well, and great that Sandra suggested that, because if I can give her a little shout out, I think she's written some of the best books on infertility, having gone through it herself, and written on that. Very, very good set of books for people that might be interested in that as well. So then in the midst of this, Jesus, confronts her with that. You don't have a husband, for you've had 5 husbands. And she immediately kind of backs off and says, you must be a prophet. Now, I've seen, again, I've talked about the way videos are done. I've seen one video where there's a surprise and she's intrigued. There's another that's kind of like, you think you're a prophet, So it's hard to figure out since we don't have the inflection.
Sure.
But nevertheless, he begins by getting her attention by talking about physical water than spiritual water. But very soon, she seems to understand that he is the Messiah, and then she races back to tell others about that. And I think that's kind of an intriguing part as well, because she probably came to the well at this time because she did not want to be around others. Don't you think that makes sense? Because she was an outcast in that regard.
Right. And that's the thing that Jesus lately has been pointing, kind of bothering me about is, I was thinking about this as an author who tries to build her platform and whatever. I was thinking, what if Jesus in the New Testament time had a consultant? And the consultant said, okay, Jesus, you really need to have a better platform. So you need to go spend some more time in the Sanhedrin. You need to be in the temple more. You need to be where there's important crowds of people, and you need to be always in these places. And yet Jesus never did that. He always defied expectations. I mean, he did it once in a while, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm always trying to garner more. He's always like, be quiet, don't tell anyone. And he goes off alone several times. And so what that shows to me is that Jesus chases the outcasts. He goes to places where you would not expect. And so as an author and a speaker, I've been asking him lately to send me to small platforms, to send me to the outcast, to send me to the people like this woman who was deeply sad, and life had dealt her some major blows. And yet what I love about this interaction is this is the longest recorded conversation in Scripture of Jesus with anybody.
Yes.
And here she is, a Samaritan, which is hated by the Jews, a woman, and a woman with a past. And he reveals very important theological truth that he has never revealed to anybody else. He says, I'm the one sitting next to you, am he. I am the Messiah. He reveals it to her. And then she, takes off running. She leaves her water jug. She goes there for water. She returns with living water, brings it back to her town, and then starts ushering in the kingdom of God, which was always beyond the Jewish realm, but the Jewish people were not seeing it at the time. So she's this first missionary evangelist, and she's this girl with a past.
And it just is amazing because, again, back to Samaria, they would go out of their way. Sometimes
or they would circumvent it.
They would take another extra day, sometimes extra 2 days if they were slow walkers, if you will, to go around there. She's talking to him. She also is talking about their mountain because they have a different mountain that they worship on. So, again, the consultant could have said, there is no value in going to Samaria. Mm-hmm. There's no value there. They have bad theology because they worship at the wrong mountain. They're half-breeds, is another
in their
phrase
minds,
they
yes,
could have.
Yep.
I mean, you can see how the consultants would say, this is the worst thing you can do, quote, Jesus, for your platform. But that's
right.
where we see Jesus. I love your idea of the platform. I never thought about that before, but he did, again, really defies expectations, and we learn a great deal about that. And I might just mention that, again, Frank does a very good job of explaining some of that, the tale of the two mountains, the transformation. Mm-hmm. And if this is maybe unfamiliar territory, if you want to do a Bible study on that or preaching, there's a lot of great material in this book. But I'm going to keep it going a little bit longer because now we come to another woman, a woman with a flow of blood. Now, this time you have to get into the physical brokenness. Mm-hmm. There may have been emotional, certainly, too, but here, just this inability to get well, to be whole, and the desperation on her part to then reach out and grab his garment. And then when he recognizes that, to wonder, am I now going to be in real trouble? But continue the story because, again, you help us understand what it must have been like for this woman who suffered 12 years from a hemorrhage.
Yeah. And, I think about today's world, and I think of people who suffer years and years with depression or fibromyalgia or something that is just a chronic condition. I think many people can relate to this. And then the fact that all of us are getting older, so yes. We're all going to be infirm in some way or another. And yet here's this woman, and also, as you know, she would have been unclean for 12 years. So yes. She couldn't really interact with people.
Social interaction.
So no hugging, no nothing. And that, I think, would be even worse because you can't heal, you're sick, you could barely walk because you're bleeding all the time. And the fact that she decides in her desperation to chase after Jesus, and her chasing probably looked like crawling. She had no more strength left. He was her last hope. And that's what I love about her. And I think it's a great picture for us today is Jesus is not after all of the people that have it perfectly together. And we, you and I live in the South, so we have kind of this church culture where everyone's put together on Sunday morning. That's not what Jesus is after. He's not after that. He wants our heart. And here's this desperate heart running after and touching and making Jesus unclean, which is crazy to think about. Here's cleanliness. Jesus is the most clean person ever. And she ceremonially makes him unclean, and he never addresses it. He doesn't say, oh, no, you just messed me up. Now I got to go wash. He didn't. He just pulls her out and dignifies her and listens to her story and lets her go, and she's healed.
Let's talk about what he said to her daughter. Isn't
yes,
that striking?
He calls her daughter. And because I think that's one thing we struggle with as Christians sometimes if we live in our head too much is, does Jesus really see me? Does he really know all the anguish that I have inside of me? And a father would know that. And so calling her daughter and just recognizing her, her place in the Jewish culture as a daughter of the king was just phenomenal.
Well, again, I think Frank does a very good job talking about unimaginable desperation. Of course, the idea of faith and daughter of the king, and some incredible stories there. So again, lots of things that you can find in this book, The Day I Met Jesus. And if you just joined us, let me mention again that this book is published by Baker Bookhouse, about 200 pages. In addition to the 5 stories, you have some opening and closing material. So I think you could make this a 5-week, 6-week, you could even stretch it to 7 weeks. I know how I could do it easily. Mm-hmm. And then you got questions in the back. So for those of you that are saying this might be something I would like to start, a Bible study on, or maybe those of you that are doing a Bible teaching, maybe you lead a Bible fellowship, maybe you're a pastor, I certainly do commend the book to you. It is published by Baker Books. Look for it in your local bookstore, and we do have links on our website, pointofview.net. We have links to Mary DeMuth. We'll finish off with Mary, and then the other Mary, both Marys, and then just maybe talk about some of the resources on her website, because you perhaps are struggling with some of that, or certainly if you are not, you know people that are, and her resources would be very helpful to those who are trying to find faith, trying to understand that God loves them, trying to put the pieces together of a broken life. And so we're going to spend some time in this last segment talking about that as well. Again, the book is published by Baker Bookhouse. Look for it in your local bookstore. And when we come back, we'll finish off our story and also encourage you to find out a little bit more about some of those resources. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. According to the Fresno Bee, the Fresno City Council is considering adding the national motto, "In God We Trust," to the wall of the council chambers. But at least one local resident opposes the proposal. In the mind of one atheist protester, the delicate balance between church and state is upset entirely by the public display of these four words. And despite the fact that the atheist writes, quote, "Atheists like me feel the idea of God has little meaning," unquote, he encourages the local community to oppose a word which he believes has little meaning. One wonders how a word with such little meaning can violate the so-called separation of church and state, but that's another issue. Of course, if folks wanted to purchase the article in the Fresno Bee, they would do so with coins bearing the national motto since 1864. The City Council would be in good company with the United States House of Representatives, which has the motto emblazoned behind the Speaker's dais. And on the way to City Hall, residents may have to drive by police or sheriff's cruisers sporting the national motto. Throughout America's history, the national motto has been honored and celebrated as an expression of what it means to be an American. Any effort to prevent its display should be rejected as bald efforts to rewrite our history and destroy our heritage. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Mary DeMuth in studio with us for just a few more minutes as we talk about the day I met Jesus, the revealing diaries of 5 women from the gospel. Thought we'd finish off with Mary for Mary, but this is an important one too because you call it the diary of the woman whom Jesus loved. And I hadn't really thought about it till I read your piece there, that she has received criticism from her sister. She's received criticism from others around. So her life is not as idyllic as some people might think. You look back and say, well, she got to be around Jesus. You got to see her brother raised from the dead. It's all good. Not exactly. So fill in the story, if you might, a little bit.
Yeah, hers was a little harder to write, oddly, because she had 3 snapshots where the other ones was just one little tiny snapshot,
Right.
and I could kind of develop. Hers, I couldn't because she had these, little pictures that I needed to weave through. But I eventually kind of came up with the idea that she was this girl, this woman who was a good person, like a good follower of Christ. And I think there's some of us out there who feel like, is it worth it? Is it worth all this dedication? People might even accuse us of following too much after Jesus. And here she was. She went into a room where only men were supposed to be. And she sits at the feet of her rabbi, only a place a man should be, seated at his feet of his rabbi. And she essentially is getting taught theology at the feet of Jesus, and Jesus praises her for it.
Yeah.
And so I love that, and that kind of helps me to think, okay, when I'm doing all the right things, it's not just the people that do the wrong things. It's when you're doing all the right things and you get discouraged and you think, no one sees me. No one can tell that I'm faithful. But we do serve the God who sees, El Roy, the God who sees, who notices your sacrifice. And so today, if you're listening and you're thinking, I don't think Jesus notices all the things that I do, he does. And Mary's story speaks to that.
I love that comment you said about El Roy, because that's in the book as well. And it also helps answer a question that I used to run into. Before I started doing this program, lots of times I would speak on college campuses. And I cannot tell you, Mary, the number of times I had women, especially feminists, say, well, Christianity is anti-woman. And my best answer was, well, maybe you could have had experiences where the church has done you wrong, so I'll acknowledge that. But Jesus was certainly not anti-woman. And that would always throw them back a little bit. What do you mean? And you just gave one example. There was no way up until the time of Jesus in which a woman would be given the kind of authority and responsibility and position that Jesus gave. They were the ones that were the first to the tomb. He reveals himself after the resurrection. She is allowed to sit at his feet. He is close friends with Mary and Martha. And time again, women are elevated out of the Greco-Roman culture in ways that we now take for granted, but were probably very striking at the time in that first century.
Very radical, very out of the box. And I'm sure the disciples were like, Jesus, don't you know you're not supposed to do that? I mean, he was always messing with them, but definitely with women. And you see it throughout all of this. I mean, she's definitely praising her and accepting her worship and validating her intelligence, which I think is really important. He let her sit there in the place of pupil. I love that.
Well, again, the book is entitled The Day I Met Jesus, The Revealing Diaries of 5 Women from the Gospels. We didn't intend it, but next hour I'm talking about the politically incorrect Jesus. And we just talked about how in some ways you have the sense that maybe the disciples said, Jesus, do you understand what the rules are here? Because
tone it down.
You're breaking every single one of these rules. So certainly we have information about the that on the website, and that can be found at pointofview.net. But I wanted just for a few minutes to talk about the resources that are available to our listeners. And we have a link to marydemuth.com. And if you click on the store, for example, you will see that you have a whole section, Finding Healing and Joy. And in some respects, all that you did in writing Not Marked and all sorts, and telling your own story, and some of the fictional novels really are poured into this. But for people, and especially women that are struggling right now with, does God really love me? Can I ever get over this incredible violation of me that has taken place? What kind of resources might be available for some of those listeners?
Yeah, Not Marked is a book that my husband and I wrote about healing from sexual abuse in the context of marriage, but it also has been helping people who aren't married as well. It's just basically a healing journey map of how to get beyond sexual abuse So that's there. There's if listeners go to marydemuth.com, they can get a free ebook, and it's called, and I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for saying this word on the air, but What to Do After People Poop on You. So bleep. But I found that people are in the church, we tend to hurt each other a lot, and it can be the thing that turns you away from the church. And so I wrote a little book that's free, about 40 pages long, about how to get over that and how to move on. So I have things like that on the site. And also I'll have to mention that The Day I Met Jesus has a website. So thedayimetjesus.com, if you want to know anything more about the book or endorsements and things like that. It's all on that site.
I might just mention just incredible number of endorsements. John Ortberg was on the program with us recently, is certainly a name that you would remember because we just had him on. Liz Curtis Higgs, I thought it was so good that she did that because, Bad Girls of the Bible, and it just fits so well. And it's a long list. Leonard Sweet, Greg Boyd, we can go down, Derwin Gray. These are all people that have been on the program. So it's a who's who of all the people we've had on this program that have endorsed your book. And I might mention also there is an audio that goes with it. I'll hold this up right now, and just you alerted us to the fact that the book is available through Baker, and you can find it in your local bookstore, but you can also through Christian Audio find The Day I Met Jesus. And back to Unmarked for just a minute, I want to give credit to you and your husband, not only the book, but you have the new DVD series. And I remember watching your Facebook that you have the Unmarked Marriage Seminar DVD. So this might be extremely helpful for any of our listeners that are looking to maybe develop that in a small group context, or to help people that are struggling with grief or depression or violation of some sort. So that is the case. And if you love Southern fiction, there are a lot of books on that, right? As well as all sorts of great books on helping people get published. And oftentimes when we have you on, we are promoting the next Christian Writers Conference. And you have been quite a mentor over these years to all sorts of people that want to be able to write more effectively, want to know how to get published. So all of that's at your website, right?
It is, and it's a fun place to be.
Well, let me mention again that they can follow you on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, to mention just a few. They can follow your blog, and you have a podcast as well, right?
I do, the Uncaged podcast, and that's been. I'm just trying to be like you, Kirby. Just following your footsteps a little bit.
I can't even keep up with all the things you're doing, and that is a wonderful podcast as well. So just lots of great resources. So if you don't know who Mary DeMuth is, she's been on the program many times before. She's in studio. We certainly encourage you to do that. And just before we go, let me mention that on our website, you can also download a podcast. If you said, ooh, everything Mary's saying, I've got a friend that really needs to hear that. You can download it. It's free of charge. We're glad to make that available. We also have a way that you can go to YouTube and watch it if you'd like, or also
we're pretty cool.
Yeah, we're getting there.
I know.
Yeah,
we look good on film. I'm just telling you.
Yeah, okay. So it's all right there. So Mary DeMuth, thank you so very much for being with us today. Again, we've been talking about her book, The Day I Met Jesus, The Revealing Diaries of 5 Women from the Gospels. And again, if you'd like more information about her, we have that link on our website. If you'd like to know more about the book, of course, that's on the website as well. And as we go to the website, let me just mention again that there's some great resources that we make available to you on a regular basis. My Viewpoints commentary is there today. We have a video for you to watch. And if you'd like to listen to this again, you can certainly go to the listen button, and that is a way in which you can get the podcast, or you can go to the watch button, and that is a way in which you can watch it again, or even go to our YouTube channel. All sorts of resources available to you, and I hope that you'll take the time to benefit from the great work that she has done, and certainly benefit from this interview. So if, again, you want to pass this on to others, we encourage you to do so. All available at our website, pointofview.net. Obviously, we need to take a break, so let's do so. And again, as we go to a break, visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll be back with more right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to spend some time talking about Jesus and the Holy Land. It's a new book that I have really enjoyed, and I was just thrilled to find out that we actually could put the author in studio with us today. The book is entitled Jesus, A Visual History, The Dramatic Story of the Messiah and the Holy Land. It is written by Dr. John Ortberg. He has a Ph.D. from Dallas Theological Seminary. He is known as the Dean Emeritus of Multnomah Biblical Seminary, and has been a president in the past of the Jerusalem University College. He's also the author of some other books you might have seen: A Visual History of the English Bible, A Visual History of the King James Bible. He's quite a collector of Bibles, by the way. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But Dr. Brake, thank you so very much for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
You know, this is a book that it's a little difficult to describe, but I'll say for people that are watching on the internet, it has a look a little bit like a coffee table book, but it's a little bit shorter. And when it first came across my desk, I didn't really know you or much about it, but I said this would be the book that I would really maybe want to make available to anybody that would go on a tour with us of Israel, because it has all sorts of maps and pictures, and especially the pictures. As I was looking through it, I thought, oh, I've been there. Oh, I've been there. Oh, this is really, I wish I had this. And I've used, of course, Charlie Dyer's book. You were just on his radio program with him. But this may be the book I'm going to make available to our people that travel with us to the nation of Israel and travel through the Holy Land. But I'd also say that if a person could never afford to go on one of those trips, this would be a good second best, because you have done just an outstanding job in this book with so many good full-color pictures of helping us see not only the life of Jesus, but as well seeing the places where he is and what it looks like today. So I know that was kind of your goal originally in writing the book, wasn't it?
Yes. One of the things that really impressed me when I learned about Jesus and I went to seminary and got to study the life of Christ, I fell in love with the life of Christ and the Gospels. And I longed for the day when I could be there and walk the land and be where he walked and breathe the air that he breathed. And so that was really the motivation behind the book. And since I had lived there and gone there many times before, it just seemed like a natural for me to work in the life of Jesus with the places where he had gone and the things that he had done.
Well, and you had been at Jerusalem University College there, so that was an opportunity for you to actually be there a little bit longer than some of us that just get to visit for a short period of time, right?
Yes, that was really the nice thing about being there, was that I could go spend time around the Sea of Galilee, at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and then in the summers when we didn't have any students there, some of us would go along with the archaeologists to see what was new on the horizon. And I just got to spend a lot more time at the individual places and just sit there and visualize what was around, what Jesus was looking at, what the disciples were seeing, how they were reacting to him. So I think that was an advantage that I had that I really appreciate.
Well, and I think you've done a good job, too. This, by the way, the book is published by Zondervan, 276 pages. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but one of the things we always do is recognize that it may not be in your particular bookstore, or you may not be near a bookstore. So if you click on the picture of the book, there is a way in which you can order it, and you can get it in paperback. It has a feel like a coffee table book, which would be hardback, but it's paperback, and I'm so grateful that Zondervan did that because it made it a little less expensive. Or you can get it by Kindle, which would show up very well on some of your tablets. So I really would encourage you to think about this. If you've always wanted a book that shows you the Holy Land and helps you really kind of work through all the different places and what they mean, and maybe put the life of Christ together in a coherent way, that would be really helpful. Even this Sunday when I was teaching, at one point I was quoting from Dr. Harold Hoehner. You know who he is.
Oh, yes, indeed.
You know, the chronological aspects of the life of Christ. Yes. You know, that helps you put together when all these things took place chronologically. And this book really helps you put together the life of Christ geographically. So I would certainly say that this is a book that should be on your bookshelf. If you're a pastor, I can't even consider that you wouldn't want to have a copy of this book. So I've done a good job of selling the book. Let's talk about what's in it now. And the first is, let's maybe work from north to south. When I have been to the Sea of Galilee, I'm struck by the fact that some of the places where Jesus was actually haven't changed that much. You can go to Capernaum and see a synagogue that was built on the synagogue where he was. So there are times when you're in Jerusalem saying, well, I have to sort of in my mind's eye imagine what that looks like. When you're in the northern part of Israel, you have a pretty good idea of what it was like to even be there during the time of Jesus, don't you?
You're absolutely right, and that's why being around the Sea of Galilee is really my favorite place.
Me too.
Because when you're in Jerusalem, like you say, there's so much gaudy stuff and trappings of spiritual things that you can't really envision what's going on. In fact, as you walk down some of the streets, you're actually about 6 feet above the level of Jesus' day. So Galilee is a wonderful place to be, and Capernaum, of course, is one of my favorites for the very reason that you mentioned. And you begin to get the feel that how close it is from the synagogue over to Peter's house,
yes,
which they believe may have been Peter's house, and Jesus may have even lived there. So you sort of get the feel of those distances, which in America it's hard, especially from being from the West Coast and the Northwest. The distances are so vast, you have to drive long distances. But in Israel, it's so compact, and you can walk actually around the Sea of Galilee, and you can walk from each one of those cities that we read about in the New Testament. So it really is one of my favorite places in all of the Israel.
Well, you mentioned that in passing. Let's talk about that for a minute, because they think it's possible that that is the home of Peter, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, they find all sorts of fishing paraphernalia in terms of archaeology. They have some things that look like maybe believers, or first-century believers, worshiped there. We never know for sure, but you even have in the book here kind of a reconstruction of what that house would look like. And that really helps me to realize what it must have been like for Jesus to be there, for Peter to be there, to heal Peter's mother-in-law. I mean, all these events in Scripture already come alive just when we come to this one place, which is virtually untouched over the centuries.
Yes, I think that's what really makes it amazing, that you can actually envision what that might have looked like. And several have made various drawings of what the place must have looked like. And so I do enjoy that part of it.
Nearby there is a place that you do have a church there, but not too much gaudy, but a possible location that you talk about where the Sermon on the Mount might have been located as well.
Yes, just right near there. It's a wonderful place because it is not only is it a mountain, of course it's not a mountain like we think of here, but a hill, and then it levels off into a plain. And we've actually stood up there and spoken to see how the voice would carry, and it's like an amphitheater, and so you can sort of envision this must have been a very possibility of the place. Now, of course, we don't know for sure.
Sure.
But there are only a few places around there that could have been that place, and this is one of them, and it's marvelous to be there and to kind of envision what that sermon must have been like.
Well, and the other thing is when you go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, you have some possibilities of where feeding of the 5,000 are and where the demons went into the pigs and some other things. I need to take a break, but we'll come back and maybe talk about that. Going to make our way to Jerusalem, but I thought we'd spend another minute or two up there in the Sea of Galilee. And we have something that they call the Jesus boat. We don't think Jesus was actually in it, but it gives us an idea of what the boat looks like. And the good news is not only can you see it in Israel, you can find it in your book, Jesus, A Visual History. Dr. Donald Brake with us. We'll continue our conversation with him right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last month, there was a big media flap because Michael Cohen, the president's personal attorney, revealed that Sean Hannity was a client. All sorts of media commentators said that Hannity should have revealed that he had a relationship with Cohen when he was talking about the FBI raid on Cohen's office. That seemed like such a good idea that some have suggested this be called the Sean Hannity standard. Not only should the Fox News host reveal his connections to people he discusses, but everyone in the media should do so. I welcome that because in researching this, I found various articles talking about the connections many in the mainstream media have with people they interview. George Stephanopoulos has served as the press secretary for President Bill Clinton, but he also interviewed former FBI Director James Comey about his decision not to prosecute Bill Clinton's wife Hillary over her mishandling of emails. NBC's Chuck Todd regularly interviews various Democratic senators. His wife is a longtime Democratic consultant and has even served as communications director for a Democratic Senate campaign. According to this new standard, Chuck Todd should have disclosed his wife's relationship with these Democrats. CNN's Jake Tapper used to work for Handgun Control, Inc., but I don't remember him acknowledging that before he moderated a town hall on gun violence. He also has been a press secretary for a congressional campaign, and his wife has served as a regional field manager for Planned Parenthood. NBC's Andrea Mitchell is married to Alan Greenspan, former Fed chairman. ABC's Claire Shipman is married to Jay Carney, former Obama press secretary. The list goes on and on. Perhaps that's why the idea of implementing the Hannity standard faded so quickly. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pleased to have in studio with us today Dr. Donald Brake, and he is Dean Emeritus of Multnomah Seminary and also an individual that has a Ph.D. from Dallas Theological Seminary, was at one time the former president of the Jerusalem University College, and author of a number of books, but the one we're talking about, Jesus, A Visual History. Just before we went to the break, Dr. Brake, we were talking about the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and you have some sections there. You have the healing of the demoniacs, and then I love this, then the location of the swine dive. Charlie Dyer talks about that in his book, but I love this because there's only a couple of places where that could have happened, and I think you have a pretty good idea of where that was, actually.
Yes. Again, we don't really know for sure, but you sort of look at the terrain and you ask yourself, what is the best possibility for it?
Where's a cliff? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I think there are a couple of places on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee that are very possible. I don't like to make any pronouncements on it, but I think one of those two places, which is Kerby and then on down to Ha'ayan, are the two possibilities where it took place.
And the good news is you show pictures of it so people can get sort of in their mind's eye what it looks like. And while we're talking about the Sea of Galilee, I mentioned the Jesus boat. First of all, there's a place you can go to, St. Peter's Fish, and everybody that ever travels there usually gets the fish that you can get right out of the sea, and so you can eat the same fish that probably were eaten in that day. But also, they discovered a boat. Now, it's called the Jesus boat. We don't know that it was the boat that Jesus was ever in, but it's from that time period, so that helps us understand a little bit more of that story as well, doesn't it?
I think it does, and it's another one of those things that show you the real possibility of what kind of boat Jesus and the disciples was in. It holds probably 15 to 18 people, and so it could have been a commercial, sort of a commercial boat, or it could have 7 or 8 fishermen that work on the sides of it. So it's really wonderful to see it, and you say, okay, now Jesus may have been down here at this corner where he was asleep when the storm came about. So it is a good visual aid to that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think you begin to learn is how much travel back and forth. You've got some maps in here, and many more than you have in the back of our Bibles. You know, I've many times looked at the back of my Bible and go, well, that map doesn't really answer the question. It's like this particular one that's kind of colorful, but you have maps about, well, here's where Jesus got baptized, which is much further to the south, and here's where Jesus came up here. Let's go all the way to the north, because we are told that when we have that famous question that Jesus asked, who do men say that I am? And, of course, Peter giving the answer, thou art the Christ. That's at Caesarea Philippi. That's very far to the north, which is really almost in pagan country. And is there significance to where that happens and why it happens?
I think so. You know, most of his journeys there on the western side of the Sea of Galilee was among the Jews.
Right.
But he left there and went up to Tyre and Sidon and came on around then and came down to Caesarea Philippi. And I think the fact that, you know, he's not teaching the kingdom because the Gentiles had no background for understanding what a kingdom was.
Yes.
So he's teaching a different message. And when he gets right there, remember the disciples had been following him for a long time. They've been listening to the controversies. Some say he is the Messiah. Some say he is not. So they've been toiling with this over and over again. It seems like they were a bit reticent to ask Jesus questions right directly, so they might have been talking back and forth. And when they get there, it's time for a midterm examination. So right. Jesus turns to them and says, okay, now you've heard all these arguments. Who do you say that I am?
Yeah.
And I think this is a wonderful time when Peter becomes the leader. He says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God.
Right.
And it's just a marvelous expression of faith on his part.
When you're in Caesarea Philippi, there's a lot of rocks around, so you have to wonder if Jesus even picks up a rock, you know, because he's talking about Petros, rock, and he uses that. And so it comes alive when you travel to the Holy Land, especially if you have a tour guide or a Bible teacher. I'd love to have you come along because I know you would bring so much to the table, and we mentioned Charlie Dyer and some others that just over the years have incorporated so much into it. It really comes alive. It's kind of like when you read your Bible, it's in black and white. When you go to the Holy Land, it's kind of in color. And for people that can't go to the Holy Land, this book is really, I think, helpful for them to understand the different elements. We've talked geography. Can I talk for a minute about chronology? Because a number of times you've done a great job in this book about talking about the different, if you will, feasts and cycles and the agricultural nature of that, which is going to get us into the issue of the Passover in just a minute. But talk about that, because when these feasts take place and when the Passovers take place, that sort of gives us a time stamp, if you will. We have a pretty good idea through, for example, the Gospel of John. You have 3 Passovers, so you have a pretty good understanding of the length of the ministry of Jesus, and you sort of understand when you know those feasts what time of year it was when Jesus said those particular words, don't you?
Yes, I think that's one of the things we might miss as we're studying the life of Jesus. The cycle of feasts are very important to Judaism of that period and very important to Jesus' ministry. And following those cycles, you're right, we can tell exactly, or at least pretty close to how long his ministry was, where he was at different times, which feast he had to be at, and which ones he could skip if he needed to, although all Jewish families would go to all of those feasts. So it's an important part. It also follows the seasons as it goes throughout the year.
And again, you have a whole section where it's the peak of the rainy season, so you help us understand where the winter rains are, and some of the other rains fill the cisterns, the dry season, the possible birth of Jesus, and you take us through all of that. So very, very well done. And again, I think people will appreciate not only understanding the Bible from a geographical point of view, but even from a cyclical kind of chronology point of view. But then you have a whole section here on the Messiah's demands, and we mentioned the Messiah. Of course, the subtitle of your book is The Dramatic Story of the Messiah in the Holy Land. Just a minute ago, we talked about Peter saying, you're the Messiah. What did that mean? Because today we have No, we even have Muslims that say, well, I believe Jesus was Messiah, but that doesn't mean to them what it means to us as Christians. What does Messiah mean, actually?
One of the reasons that I incorporated Messiah all the way through in the various chapters is to point out the fact that I'm talking about the man Jesus, and I'm wanting people to feel what Jesus felt, that they could feel the breeze coming off of the Sea of Galilee. They could feel the breath of the desert breathing into them, and the walking the steps and the tiredness and all of that that's involved with the human. But we must remember that Jesus was more than just a man Jesus. He was the Messiah. He was the God-man. And so I wanted to incorporate that, although I'm emphasizing all the way through the man Jesus. I want to make sure that we don't forget that Jesus was the Messiah. He's the anointed one, the promised one, who has come to save sinners from their plight. And so Messiah is that very important part of the life of Jesus. And that's why most books on the life of Jesus say the life of Christ.
Yes.
Because they're emphasizing the ministry of Jesus as the God-man, whereas I'm just trying to emphasize Jesus as a man, but I wanted that undertone to point out that it's more than just a man who walked the earth.
And again, because he was a Jew and because he was the Messiah, he still obeyed these various feasts. You have one here, the Feast of Trumpets, of course, the one I've just alluded to, and you've got quite a bit here on the Feast of Passover and the Messiah and the different kinds of Passovers and what that might entail. That's important as well. I've always said that a Christian should go through some kind of Jewish Seder to understand that a little bit more and its significance. What would you suggest? You've lived in both worlds. You've been here in the United States, and you've been a professor as well as the dean of Multnomah Biblical Seminary, but you've also lived in Jerusalem and been the president of the Jerusalem University College. Do we as Gentiles need to know a little bit more about the Jewish feasts?
Oh, I think so. I think it's a wonderful thing when we begin to understand. I think that's a real advantage of people who actually go to the Holy Land. They will see what the Jews are doing. They will see the reverence that so many of them have towards these different feasts. Now, actually, Israel is getting very secular. Yes. If you go to Tel Aviv, you'll find a total secular society. But in Jerusalem, it's more of a spiritual community. And I remember one time when the Feast of came along, where there was the atonement coming up. We walked out on the ledge of the Institute and stood there. Absolute death silence everywhere in the city. You heard no noise except for this solid footmarks of people walking down the street. They were taking it deadly serious, the importance of the sacrifice. Now, they did not know that Jesus has taken away the sins and he is the new sacrifice, but it just shows you the respect that they have and the need for someone to save them.
Outstanding. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to make our way to Jerusalem because we've been holding that for the last half hour, and there is certainly a lot to discuss there. Do we know where the tomb of Jesus is, and what about the pool of Bethsaida, and all sorts of other very important issues that we'll be talking about as well, the pool of Bethesda, and so many things that we will cover in just a minute. But we need to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation today as we talk with Dr. John Ortberg, Jesus, A Visual History. It is published by Zondervan. We have information about it on our website. We'll be right back.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. or call us 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. John Ortberg, and if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Mostly this is one, I think, where you sit back and just listen from an individual that has put together an outstanding book. But if you have a comment or question, we certainly would welcome that as well. And some of you have traveled to the Holy Land and maybe have some comments or some reflections, we'd love to hear from you. But if not, sit back and take some notes and enjoy the conversation. We're going to focus some time on Jerusalem and the chapter there, Messiah's Holy City, forever young, forever old. And the first thing is, as I turn the page, is the division of the walled part of Jerusalem into the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, the Muslim quarter, and the Jewish quarter. Very important if somebody travels there to recognize how different these people living in very close proximity are in that holy city.
Yes, it's an amazing to walk from one end to the other, and all the trappings you get as you pass from one to the other.
Sure.
And it's interesting because you'll find Jewish people walking through the Muslim quarter, Muslims walking through the Jewish quarter. And as we sit here in the U.S., we think no one would ever dare do that. But there's a lot of mixture. Now, they don't speak to each other, and they sort of shun each other as they walk past each other, but they're there.
Yes.
I remember one of the experiences that my wife and I had such a chuckle about was one of the early times that we were walking through the old city, we came to the Jewish quarter, and here we had to stand back because we saw a whole group of soldiers coming down the walkway, and they were all women, and they all had guns over their shoulders with a flower in the barrels of each one of them. So we thought that was an amazing marching army of flowers.
Well, and again, that division there you can see also in this film that some of our listeners might have seen. It's an IMAX film, and I'm sure it'll come out in DVD. Now, it was done by National Geographic, so it doesn't have the spiritual insight that Dr. Brake has. But what they do is they take you through Jerusalem, and it's fascinating. They also fly through with these cameras so that you can see parts of the Holy Land you've never seen before. But as they're in Jerusalem, they tell the story of a Muslim girl, a Christian girl, and a Jewish girl. And so you kind of understand at least the remarkable differences in that very small area. And, of course, as you point out, even as you begin to look through some of the pages, you have some of the IDF soldiers there as well. So they're trying to keep the peace. But when we find that there's some kind of riot or conflict, it's almost understandable given the remarkable differences theologically as well as politically that are all packed into this very small particular acreage, right?
Yes, that's certainly true. And it is a small area. I used to get up in the morning and try to jog around the city, and it just takes a matter of a few minutes to jog clear around the old city.
That's
now,
amazing.
Of course, if you had to jog around the modern city of Jerusalem, it would take a lot longer, but it is a very small area, and the place is absolutely packed with people.
Well, let's talk about some of the things they would see if they were to go there. One of those, of course, is the Western Wall and what is known as the Wailing Wall. That has, of course, significance to Jewish believers, but it also helps us understand what the Temple Mount looked like. Explain that geographically, if you might, for just a minute.
Yes, the Western Wall is the western side of the Temple Mount area. The Temple Mount is the total area that housed the temple and all of the things that went on around the temple. It was expanded during Herod the Great, who extended that area to quite a bit. But right now, it's completely inhabited by Islam.
Mm-hmm.
They have their major mosque up there. They have all their demonstrations there. They have the Dome of the Rock, which is not really their practicing mosque, but it's a very important part. But the Western Wall is really the closest that you can get to the place where the sacrifices took place. And so for the Jews, that's the holiest place in the world because that's the closest they can get. They wouldn't dare walk up on the Temple Mount because it's defiled.
Mm-hmm.
So the Western Wall is very, very important to them. And to watch them pray at the Western Wall is quite amazing because for them, prayer is action. It's not just silent.
Move. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they bow back and forth. Yes,
mm-hmm.
Exactly. They poke prayers into the wall, the cracks of the wall. So it's an amazing place to be and to watch the worship there.
No, just recently, of course, we had what was the Passover and everything else. And, of course, we call that time of Easter. But it also answers a question people have always asked, and that is, what happens to all the pieces of paper? And they showed the other day where they would take them out and remove them, I think, 3 times a year. So you have the answer to that. So that's the Western Wall. Let's go down to the southern part, because in your book here you have some of these steps that would actually have led into the temple. We believe that those are the steps that certainly Peter and Paul and Jesus walked up. This is most likely one possible location where Peter actually spoke on the day of Pentecost. So we have at least some of those steps that we can actually sit on and look at and understand that this is exactly where some of this took place.
Yes, and that's a fairly recent uncovering of those steps. I remember when I first went there to Israel, we didn't see those, but now you can actually sit down there and say, you know, I'm sitting in a place where Jesus may have walked right up these steps. And it's a wonderful place, and it gives us a lot of insight into how the temple worship functioned.
Now, you said just a few minutes ago that some of the places where Jesus was are beneath us. And a good illustration of that is if you go to the pool of Bethesda. When people go to that, they would think, well, we would see a pool out there. And they have to look down into kind of a cavernous excavation to get down to where the pool of Bethesda is. Explain that, because that is much further down. But again, we can see where Jesus, no doubt, healed that individual. But the place where we're walking is much higher than where that actually was during the time of Jesus, isn't it?
Yeah, the archaeologists, their greatest complaint is that they can't dig everywhere they want.
Yes.
Because with so many destructions of the city over and over again, they just rebuild, they pile the rubble up, they flatten it up, and they start rebuilding over the top. So that by the time we reach the 20th century, the 21st century, we have all these levels of destruction. So now when an archaeologist wants to find something, he has to dig down. So around the pool is higher than it would have been originally, probably maybe 6 feet or so. So it's important to see that and understand that, but it's nice to look down there and know that that probably is the pool.
That is really something. Well, again, we just come past Easter, so I thought it would be a good time to focus on some of that. First of all, you've got a little division, I guess you could say, between where Jesus was crucified and where his body was laid. And that gets into what was outside the city at the time, because we're told that he was crucified on Golgotha, and it's outside the city. We know that. We know most likely that he was laid in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. But you have really two kind of visions about that in the Via Dolorosa. Can you kind of sort those out for us?
Yes. Traditionally, the Via Dolorosa included the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Mm-hmm.
So it went from the northwestern section of the Temple Mount down to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That has been traditional for years and years. But for Christians, that's not a very pleasing atmosphere to be in. You can't think of a peaceful garden where Jesus was laid to rest and where he rose. So in the 19th century, Gordon, who was from the Sudan, came up, and he felt that he found the place where it looked like a skull. There were 2 eyes and a mouth socket. And then he envisioned that the whole city of Jerusalem, the old city, formed the body and head of Christ, or a person. And so the hips would have been at the Temple Mount, and the head extended up where the skull is. And so because it was outside the current wall of his day, he said this must be the place where Jesus was crucified and buried. So that became Gordon's Calvary. They call it today the Garden Tomb. And so that was the tradition, but most Protestants like, because you can go there, you can get a wonderful service there on Sunday, and you can look at the tomb as you sit there and listen to the messages. So it's really a peaceful and a nice place to worship. Whereas the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it has divisions of various different churches. It has Catholics and Greek Orthodox and Ethiopian Orthodox and number of groups, Coptics, and they all have their piece of the rock. And so it's hard to envision that this is where Jesus was crucified and where he was buried and rose again. But probably evidence would point to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre as being probably the best place, though I would never want to totally admit that, because I think the Garden Tomb provides the Protestants with such a wonderful place to meditate and to pray.
Sure. Let's take a break, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. But we're just about out of time today, but giving you a little bit of a look at the Holy Land through the eyes of Dr. Donald Brake, but also through his book, Jesus, A Visual History. It is published by Zondervan, just an outstanding book, and you can find out more about it on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. According to the Fresno Bee, the Fresno City Council is considering adding the national motto, "In God We Trust," to the wall of the council chambers. But at least one local resident opposes the proposal. In the mind of one atheist protester, the delicate balance between church and state is upset entirely by the public display of these four words. And despite the fact that the atheist writes, quote, "Atheists like me feel the idea of God has little meaning," unquote, he encourages the local community to oppose a word which he believes has little meaning. One wonders how a word with such little meaning can violate the so-called separation of church and state, but that's another issue. Of course, if folks wanted to purchase the article in the Fresno Bee, they would do so with coins bearing the national motto since 1864. The city council would be in good company with the United States House of Representatives, which has the motto emblazoned behind the speaker's dais. And on the way to City Hall, residents may have to drive by police or sheriff's cruisers sporting the national motto. Throughout America's history, the national motto has been honored and celebrated as an expression of what it means to be an American. Any effort to prevent its display should be rejected as bald efforts to rewrite our history and destroy our heritage. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Dr. Donald Brake, and if you would like to join us, you are welcome to do so, 1-800-351-1212, or just simply sit back and enjoy the conversation. You will enjoy this book. It is, again, entitled Jesus, A Visual History, published by Zondervan, 76 pages, and it is just wonderfully illustrated, and I think will help you understand so much more about what has actually transpired in the scriptures and how to put that together from a geographical point of view as well as from a chronological point of view. And some of the pictures you have in here are various models that appear at the Israel Museum. And last time I was at the Israel Museum, I look up and there's Charlie Dyer, and he's asking, "What do you hear?" I said, "What do you hear?" Well, we've been using his book, so I introduced everybody to the author of the book. But that gives you a very good visual image of what it must have looked like to have the temple, the trial before Pilate, the Via Dolorosa where Jesus was buried, which you can't really get when you're in modern-day Jerusalem. And again, Dr. Brake, you have taken the time to take some of those pictures from that museum and put them in the book so people can understand what it must have looked like in that first century.
And I think, again, that's very important. As you mentioned earlier, we learn visually, and the more we can visualize things, the better our comprehension of the written material is. So I think those kinds of things really do help.
Well, and one of the other things I thought I might mention before I take a phone call, and we might even grab a phone call here real quickly, is you've got a section here on Pontius Pilate. I mentioned Caesarea, but there was another Caesarea. This is the Caesarea on the Mediterranean coast, and that's where Pontius Pilate was. Well, it so happens that we actually have the inscription. So as people, for example, maybe have been watching AD, which is the TV program done by Mark Burnett and Rona Downey right now, and they see Pontius Pilate, we have independent archaeological evidence of Pontius Pilate, for example, and we have independent archaeological evidence of a lot of things that are in Scripture. And that's really encouraging us too, isn't it?
That really is, because there was a day where people said, well, there was probably no such person as Caiaphas, for instance, or Pontius Pilate, and we only have that from secular or from religious literature. Well, when we find these inscriptions, they have to back off of it and say, yes, indeed, they really were people. So I think those archaeological discoveries have only gone to encourage Christians in what we believe from the Bible.
Let's take some phone calls. We'll go to Georgia first. And Arnice, thank you for calling WAGP. What would you like to ask?
When Jesus arose and told the disciples to go to Galilee, how far is it from Galilee from Jerusalem to Galilee? And then then he told them to stay in Jerusalem later. But so it was a pretty good little walk. From Jerusalem to Galilee, I understand.
Well, it certainly was. And, in this map that you have here, it makes it pretty easy because you can follow it and see that basically it's, in round numbers, about 60 miles or so, isn't it? What's the exact...
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit more than that, perhaps, but it is a long walk.
It sure
of course,
is.
It's up some pretty steep terrain, and it would have been a tough walk.
Well, and one of the things that I think is helpful sometimes is the Scriptures, obviously, and the Gospels just have those various events in Jesus, but you have to recognize that when it says when Jesus walked from, for example, the Sea of Galilee to Caesarea Philippi, well, that's going to take you 20 miles. When he's going to walk from Galilee, it's going to be, well, I guess more than maybe 70 or 80 miles. You realize that this took a couple of days. And we've had tours that we've offered for people if they want to walk the walk of Jesus. We don't have many takers for it because, as you said, you have to really understand that these are very long distances in those days when you walk. They're very short when we get on our buses and travel in the Holy Land. And it helps you understand that there were times for Jesus to walk with the disciples, to sit, to drink, to eat some fish, eat some bread, to maybe even be teaching on the way, and to recognize that much of that was not recorded in the Scriptures, but much of that was necessitated simply by walking all over the Holy Land in that day.
I think what you're mentioning there is important, too, because on the one hand, things were so quiet that you could actually walk at a group of 8 or 10 or 12, and you could hear each other talking back and forth. Today, in our modern cities, there's so much noise with cars and buses and airplanes that you can't really do that. You have to get right up in each other's ear. So I think it was a good opportunity for them to, as they traveled, a lot of teaching was going on at that time.
We do have some other places which we can pretty much identify with the life of Christ. I have not mentioned the Garden of Gethsemane. We know exactly where that is. We know that there were olive trees there. We know that there was olive presses there. So we can pretty much trace those last 24 hours of Jesus pretty accurately, can't we?
Yes, I think that, again, is a very good thing for people to do when they're in Israel, is to walk those areas, start up at the top of the mountain and walk down into the valley and into the city of Jerusalem. I think it's really fun to see exactly how that works, because it's the same path today. I mean, there's roads now, hard-core roads, but it's the same area and the same pathway.
And I think it, again, is just an illustration that right now, if I were to ask people, okay, where was the temple? Where was the Mount of Olives? Where's Bethany? Where was the Pool of Bethesda? Where, they would say, I don't know. And this book really would help them put that together in a geographical way. but then you also have helped us with the various feasts and the what you call the agricultural calendar to begin to put it together in a chronological way. So if you've been reading the Bible, and I hope that you are, but you maybe haven't understood all the little elements of it, I think this is a book that you would really want to have as a companion. And Dr. Brake, I'm going to make sure we increase the sales of this by nothing else, encouraging that everybody that goes on our next trip to Israel takes this along. If you read it ahead of time, you'd get so much more out of it, because as you well know, I think you shared with us off air, so let's talk about it on air. Sometimes people go to the Holy Land, they take all these pictures, and at the end they go, now where was this picture and what was this? And so the hope is to begin to help people put all of that together. So you've done an outstanding job. I might mention some of your other books as well, A Visual History of the English Bible, A Visual History of the King James Bible. I know you've been an individual that has quite a collection of rare English Bibles and Greek New Testaments. You and a couple of other people that have been collecting those are certainly a great treasure to have there as well. So thanks for taking the time to join us today in studio.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We certainly do encourage you to learn God's Word as much as you can. There are lots of ways to get into it. First of all, of course, get a Bible, but get some commentaries, maybe even our computer programs that we have made available so that you can have access to the tools necessary to understand God's Word. But more importantly, I hope that you will think about getting a copy of this book. It's called Jesus, A Visual History, The Dramatic Story of the Messiah in the Holy Land. And if you would look for it in your local bookstore, I hope you can find it there. But if not, simply click on the picture of the book on our website, and there is a paperback edition of it, and there is a Kindle edition of it. And I think you would certainly want to enjoy those, and I think it is going to help you a great deal in your study of God's Word and to put it all together. If you can ever possibly go to the Holy Land, it will take that black and white picture you have of the Bible and turn it into 3D and color. But the next best is to get this book, and I certainly do recommend it to you. Lots of resources on the website today, including, of course, this book, which I do recommend, as I mentioned just a minute ago, because it is going to be a way that you will begin to see the Bible in 3 dimensions. Certainly the best thing is for you to go to the Holy Land, but second best is to read some of these books and resources, and so that's why we have some of the links to these particular resources, and I hope you'll take advantage of them as well. That's all we have for today. Visit the website, pointofview.net, to find out a little bit more about some of the interviews we've done today. I want to also thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Visit the website and certainly benefit from the resources we have. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question: where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go world, and now wherever you go, Point of View goes with you. Visit the Apple or Google Play Store and download the free Point of View app. You can listen and watch the program live or play it again later. Get Kerby's Viewpoints commentary. Click the Take Action link, learn about important issues, and make a difference in this world. You can also read articles, find a local radio station, easily contact us with your comments or questions. Don't leave home or the office or anywhere else without Point of View. Again, visit the Apple or Google Play Store today and get the app, the free Point of View radio app. Oh, and one more thing, if you like it, click that little button that says Donate Now and join the team. Point of View and the Point of View app, with you on the go.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary